way of indication if all our speakers are present. Maybe you can just give me a thumbs up so that I know that you are in the room. I didn't see any indication. Maybe I'll just ask our back office, our comms, to just check if there are any reactions, if the speakers are in the room, and then you can just send me a message in the chat so that I can proceed. But Mika, Sizanele, please confirm if all the speakers are present. I can't see some of the names. I can see most of the participants, but I can't see the speakers.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hoveni. We have the speakers with exception of one speaker. We're following up. I can see Zama has also written in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah, let us just follow up. I know Dr. Ngobo also is there. I saw SC, she has also indicated. So we are left with one speaker. We will follow up and I will send you communication on that one speaker.
Okay, who is missing?
We're missing CRL.
Okay, CRL.
No,
Yes.
I'm in.
Where are you?
I'm in.
I'm looking for your name. Where are you? Can you just send a thumbs up? Let me see on the screen.
Okay. Can't it? Okay.
Yes, I can see it.
Okay.
Portia
Is
Pardon
it
me.
under Portia?
Yeah, PT, Portia someone.
Okay.
Thank you.
So in that case, everyone is here. Can you confirm?
Pardon me, Program Director, I am not seeing Commissioner van der Merwe.
Okay.
But I'll quickly check.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. No, I think let us proceed with introductions, welcome and introductions. I do note that Com van der Merwe, I think she is one of the last speakers to speak today. So let us just proceed and then hopefully she will join us. So for those who have joined after my initial welcome to this webinar on religion, gender, and health from systemic inequalities to embodied realities. I am Dr. Jamela Basani-Oveni. I am the HOD for research at the Commission for Gender Equality, and today I will be facilitating the discussion. I would like to first just start by emphasizing just how important this discussion is and just how much we are looking forward to our speakers actually showing us the intersections and joining the dots for us in terms of the three topics: gender, religion, and health. And I also just want to thank them in advance for being present today and being willing to join us for this discussion. So I will start by introducing each of the speakers. We have 4 speakers that will be speaking this morning. And thereafter, we will invite each of them to present something that they have prepared on the topic. And just in terms of logistics, I will introduce all of them at once and then invite each of them to come in to make their presentation one after the other. Thereafter, we will have a reflection and a Q&A and maybe some comments from the audience. And we will also just, I will also just facilitate that discussion, and then we will have a closing by our PM from KwaZulu-Natal, Ms. Zanele Ngwane. Okay, thanks for that. Thanks for your patience. So I will start just by introducing the first speaker on my list. That's Dr. Zaman Charlie Dlamini. Please excuse me, or please forgive me if I am mispronouncing your name. So Dr. Dlamini. Dr. Dlamini is an international feminist scholar in the Department of Practical and Missional Theology at the University of Free State in Bloemfontein. Her work engages gender, religion, culture, and social justice through a decolonial and feminist lens to confront violence and harmful theologies. She serves on the board of Inclusive and Affirmed Ministry and participate in the ACT Alliance Theological Reference Group. Through her research, teaching, and writing, Dr. Zama advocates for justice and challenges theological frameworks that marginalize women, girls, and queer persons. She is equally committed to pastoral care as a site of healing, dignity, and justice within faith communities. Welcome, Dr. Dlamini. If you can, maybe just put on your camera so that we can just see your face, and then you can switch it off thereafter.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Dr. Dlamini. I will move on to introducing our second speaker, that is Lindiwe Maseko. Lindiwe Princess Maseko is a PhD candidate in gender and religion in the School of Religion, Philosophy and Classics at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. Her research focus includes, but is not limited to, gender, religion, culture, African women, sexual and reproductive health and rights, lived religion, and indigenous knowledge systems. Current published scholarly work includes women and peace building and sustainable development, gender-based violence, young African women and leadership, and gender and pandemics. Welcome, Lindiwe Maseko. If you can just put on your camera and give us a quick greeting.
Thank you so much. Greetings to everyone. Thank you for having us here. Looking forward for a rich discussion with you.
Thank you, Lindiwe. I will now move on to introduce Dr. Siwakile Ngobo. Please forgive me. Dr. Siwa is a lecturer in the Department of Religious Studies at the University of Pretoria. His work focuses on gender, pop culture, religion, and masculinity studies. He holds a Doctor of Philosophy in Human Sciences, specializing in gender and religion, a master's, a Bachelor of Theology honors, and a Bachelor of Social Science degree in Psychology and Management. Dr. Ngobo has taught postgraduate modules in gender, religion, theology, and masculinity at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, where his lectures critically engaged with the intersection of theology, masculinities, and post-colonial theory. His research explores the dynamics of masculinities, gendered power, and religious discourse in contemporary African context. After completing his PhD, he also had a vested interest in exploring alternative and innovative research methodologies within the social sciences and advocates for African-centered and decolonial approaches to research. He has presented his work at national and regional conferences, including at the University of Stellenbosch, Pan-African Social Research Junior Scholars Workshop in Nairobi. In addition, he has delivered public lectures at the University of South Africa, Department of Gender and Sexuality Studies, and the Methodist Student Association, contributing to public scholarship on gender justice and social transformation. Welcome, Dr. Siwa. Please, if you may just put on your camera and give us a quick greeting.
Good morning, everyone. So happy to be here again. I look forward to a productive conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Siwa. I will now move on to Dr. Avashoni Tsangwani. Dr. Avashoni Portia Tsangwani was born and raised in the rural community of Vuwani in Limpopo province. She holds a primary teacher's diploma from Mercado College of Education, a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of South Africa, a Bachelor of Education honors from Vista University, a master's degree in public management, and a Doctor of Administration from the University of Venda. She has served communities across education, skills development, higher education, and the public sector, having worked as an educator with the Department of Education for 17 years as a manager at MJ Mafunisa Consulting for 6 years, and a lecturer at the University of Limpopo for 3 years. She currently serves as a public education and advocacy officer at the CRL Rights Commission. Welcome, Dr. Avashoni Tsangwani. Please, if you can just put on your camera and give us a quick greeting. Dr. Tsangwani, are you there?
I'm sorry, I didn't unmute. Okay, good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be with you this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Tsangwani. And then finally, I would like to introduce our Commissioner, Leanne van der Merwe, just to check if she is in the room now, colleagues.
Not yet, Chairperson, but she
Not
has
yet,
requested
Chair.
us to resend her the link, so please just allow her 2 minutes.
Okay. Should I wait or should I just introduce her in absentia?
Good morning, HOD. Good morning, colleagues. I'm
you.
here.
Thank you.
I'm not sure how good my internet connection is. I will switch on my camera at a later stage if that's okay.
No problem. We were just about to read your bio, so I will just proceed with that. Commissioner Leanne van der Merwe has a strong background in social and sexual health activism. She is a passionate and dedicated qualitative health researcher working at the intersection of identity, HIV, and sociocultural, economic, and political determinants. She contributes to research and teaching to develop a responsive, well-capacitated health worker force, ultimately strengthening the healthcare system. Her education, technical skills, personal and professional attributes would contribute positively to the goal of advancing research and training in tertiary education settings. She is currently a candidate for PhD Public Health and Medicine at UKZN and has received a research ethics training from the University of Hong Kong. She holds a Master in Public Health from UNISA and a postgraduate diploma in Public Health from the University of Western Cape. Welcome, Com van der Merwe. Thank you. I think that it should conclude our introductions and especially our introduction of our speakers. I will now proceed to the program, which is before us. So we have done opening and welcome. I would like to invite our first speaker of the day, Dr. Zamanchali Dlamini, to present for 15 minutes on global context, engaging gender, religion, and health as systemic inequality. Dr. Dlamini, you have 15 minutes, and my colleagues will help me to keep time, and we will just send you a message when your time is up, just to remind you to wrap up. Thank you.
Okay.
Over to you.
Good morning, colleagues. Thank you for this invitation this morning. And I want to also appreciate that we are really having a timely conversation. Perhaps to give context to the work that we are doing, in general, women and girls are systematically disadvantaged globally. I think that's just the most traditional definition of how issues of gender remain a concern in the global terrain. However, if we were to expand the definition as we not only look at women and girl children, but we also want to expand the definition looking at sexually diverse identities as people who are vulnerable because of structural and systemic mechanisms. And what is more profound is that there's elements that or mechanisms that that excludes and that actually dehumanize women, girl children, and queer persons are deeply embedded within our social, political, and economic systems. But perhaps to kickstart our conversation, it becomes important to engage on the concept of gender. In our societies, we've always been made to understand that gender is simply perhaps alluding to the biological aspect of human or physiological making. However, when we speak of gender, we want to make an emphasis that we are really alluding to the elements that are socially structured, where roles, norms are not only defining the destiny of many people, but we want to acknowledge that there are bodies that remain vulnerable. There are bodies and their sexualities and their authorities that define the destiny and the in terms of how people navigate life. It is not everyone who fit in the traditional categories. We want to acknowledge that the power relations that are attached to masculinity, femininity, and non-binary identities make people vulnerable in society. The vulnerability is linked to economic, cultural, political, and religious systems. And as the goals of gender justice as one of, or as the main of our sustainable development, we want to see how then do the systems ensure that the structures and the systems that continue to reinforce the marginalization of women and queer persons are dismantled. Gender inequality is a reality, not globally, but in South Africa, in the South African context. We want to acknowledge that primarily women are disadvantaged. They are disadvantaged in job opportunities. They are disadvantages in terms of accessing or ascending to leadership opportunities. But we also, when we engage from the context of religion, we also acknowledge that the exclusion is so profound in faith spaces because women remain excluded in opportunities that are allowing them to really to enjoy their participation by all means. We also want to acknowledge the reality of women being vulnerable to all forms of sexual exploitation and violence. But also we include the definition of queer persons as we relate to the hate crimes they endure on a daily basis. They are being vulnerable because of beatings, rape, and weapons of violence, and bodies of young girls and women where they are forced into prostitution, and how women continually negotiate their sex and how their bodies are continually policed are the conversations that we're supposed to be engaging on. perhaps to bring in the strong element of religion into this conversation, we acknowledge that religion has been a major, pervasive, structural component in how the society is structured. It is this arrangement that continually reproduces and reinforcing the inequality that justifies that some bodies are sacred and some bodies are not sacred. It is this inequality that also creates challenges in terms of autonomy, where women and sexually diverse identities are having it impossible or finding it impossible to access the opportunities around healthcare, around economic emancipation. And these are the structures that when we trace back on history, we do pick up that systems of power has been shaped by systems or rather frameworks that speaks to patriarchy. How patriarchy has been reinforced in our society, particularly where we have a look at the African culture as one of the elements and which continues to define how women and sexually diverse persons are vulnerable in society. We also acknowledge the colonial script that is deeply embedded in the psyche of our society, which also seem to be creating limitations for those who are sexually diverse. In the context of religion, it is always important to recognize where the limitations come from, because those who have powers, those who have authority, claim to speak on behalf of God in determining whose bodies remain sacred, whose suffering is normalized in society. In the context of our of the African diaspora, there is a reality that there is a strong force that comes from our African tradition and African practices that continue to reinforce the rigid patriarchal norms, which affects primarily those who've been at the margins of society. I'm sure if we could all share our experiences, particularly those who come from the Black African families or societies or communities, how they would make recollection of patriarchal norms and expectations as being the bread of the underlying reinforcers of the abuse or of the marginalization and the vulnerability that is faced by those who remain in the margins of society. What we have observed over the years is how religion has been powerful in reinforcing and normalizing the inequalities. One of the profound scholars in gender and religion speaks of the unholy alliance, where she alludes to the gender, religion, and culture as damaging elements that makes people vulnerable. I mean, if we go back to the times of HIV and AIDS, we would be able to recall that women, with all efforts that were done, remained more vulnerable because of power, because of religion being acknowledged as a site of control. We also look at religion and look at the religious doctrines that continue to regulate women's bodies and the sexuality issues where women are silenced and the survivors of violence are justified through male headship theologies. We also acknowledge the silence as a theological a conversation or is a theological language that has rendered women to stay in the abusive relationship. So if we were also to bring in the last element of health into this conversation, we then recognize that if we want to look at elements that bring sustainable development in society, it's to hold this conversation as we look for the aspects that helps us to dismantle the systemic and the structural processes that dehumanize and that violate those who are vulnerable in society. Perhaps for now, I need to just pause as that was just a way of creating just an understanding of where the systems of gender, religion, as well as health come into a conversation if we want to really dismantle and destabilize the challenges around gender, religion, and health. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dlamini. I think you gave us a very good, background, or let me say foundation for this conversation. And I would like to thank you for that. And we will come back to this discussion in the Q&A and reflections. Let us move on to welcome Lindiwe Maseko, who will be presenting to us on African context, women, children, religion, and health inequality. Thank you.
Good morning once again. And thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you to Dr. Zama for giving us a foundation of the context that we are talking about. The nature of my presentation as well, due to the nature of this research, which is so broad, Tracy, I'll only look at African women, religion, and health. I know it is a bit biased, but please forgive me. I was once a child, but today I will speak like a woman. Although I know that usually in times of unrest, what affects women or mothers usually affects children. I invite our colleagues in the webinar to also interact with me in the chat as they and say their thoughts on children or women as we move on. Secondly, the nature of my presentation will begin by the untold truths or the context of what is happening on this matter, and followed by the factors hindering women's equitable health. And then we finish by having some difficult conversation or like kind of interview with the faith, religious communities or spaces. Tracy, can you please go to second slide? Second slide, right? Okay, so when Tracy asked me to speak today, I thought about it and I said, I would like just to be a vessel to represent African women's voices rather than bringing my own 2 cents. So I used an interactive method, which is social media polling. Generally, I'm a networked young woman of faith, so I just thought to ask my fellow women in my cycles within the African context, and I got an overwhelming responses from South Africa, Zimbabwe, Malawi, Zambia, Mozambique, Namibia, Mauritius, Rwanda, Burundi, Tanzania, and Ethiopia. And the reason why I had to spread my wings in preparing for my presentation is that African women's diverse voices, health issues like this we are talking today are very critical, as this is also a practice of equality among women. Because in as much as we say, okay, health is a gendered issue, it affects men and women differently, but we also have to hear what different women from different contexts say on this matter. And that way, we're already creating an equitable foundation for women in this discussion. So because as we shall see, sometimes it is us women who are the custodians of patriarchal culture and who also hinder each other's equitable health. So I had to spread my wings so that I can get I can use this rich African lens from different women. Tracy, can you please go to slide number 3? So as you see on the slide, I got an overwhelming response from my colleagues, from these women that I've networked with, and you can pick some of the puzzle, some of the words that are already speaking to the context that we are going to talk about today. It is out of this a conversation that I had on social media or from their comments that I picked some of the stories that I'm going to read. Next slide, please. So it is out of this social media polling where I read the following stories. As a woman, when we are married to a man who has got his own kids, you're expected to love those kids as his. But how do you love someone's kids? And why should I be forced to love another woman's child or children when I did not give birth to? But our African society sometimes give us pressure in this situation. And the next thing, I'm sick, I have blood pressure, stress, depression, because umfazi is expected to be embokodo. No, mina, I'm not embokodo. I'm a marshmallow, fragile, and I'm a butterfly. This woman is from Zimbabwe. The next story is, in most cases, women are expected to be strong even when they are sick. It's rare that they are taken care of by someone, especially when home, unless when admitted in the hospital. That is when it becomes a matter of agency. The word of God's healing strengthens us as women, but mostly we need just more than God's assurance of healing mercies, but care and love from those around us. This woman is from Zambia. Next story. It's like health is still seen as a taboo. If you are going there, you want to talk about menstruation, you want to talk about HIV, for example, you want to talk, okay, they might even mention something like, we don't want to talk about these issues. I don't know. Maybe they are just not well informed about those issues. They think it's better not to mention them. But then again, it is possible to find people who can address those matters. And it's also okay. It's also possible that we talk about these issues. This woman is from Mozambique. Then another woman says, I live alone, so I have to tag it out. But it's so sad to see that a family still expect the woman to still show up as though they are at their best. She's from Namibia. Then another woman says, on this, I think women who do not want to give birth at all or want to stop often struggle with how most religions portray childbearing as a woman's call. Rwanda. In the years that I've worked as a gender expert in safeguarding personnel in faith circles, there's a higher stigma rate from religious leaders towards youth, especially young women. And even though the young women goes to their religious leaders, passing all the barriers, there will be another case report for their sermon and for the church community to point finger at them. So it is rare that women's health is discussed in the faith community I worked in. She's from Ethiopia. When I was pregnant with my little girl, I visited hospital more than 10 times in the course of 9 months. I had all the medication I needed. I had a team of healthcare professionals who assigned for me to make sure that I deliver well because my baby was said to be very small. I had a job and money that enabled me. Imagine a pregnant woman in a developing country whose job could be less paying or probably jobless. How would they manage a situation like mine? Think about transportation costs to access the healthcare facilities. Think about nutrition, good healthy foods. All of them need money, and how women are in the position to fund themselves. A woman from Zimbabwe, but she's in diaspora. Then the last woman says, faith can help a person to stay strong by giving them spiritual encouragement hope, and sense of purpose that motivates resilience and perseverance during hardship. She's from Burundi. So these narratives shared by women across African communities, you can tell that they're painting a vivid picture of resilience in complex social landscapes. Their stories reveal a journey of deeply rooted cultural expectations, gender roles, and societal norms that shape their perception of health, care, and well-being. Many women now navigate the delicate balance of fulfilling traditional roles such as marriage, motherhood, and caregiving, while also contending with the personal challenges that arise from these expectations. But can we talk about African women health and equality or inequality without zooming into patriarchal and systemic realities? This has to be understood or improved. It cannot be understood or improved without considering how religion, culture, and patriarch influence their lived choices and realities. Okay, thank you, Tracy. So we'll find that there are factors hindering African women's equitable health, which are different factors. Can you please move to the next slide, please? Yes. So the first group of factors is the social, cultural, and gendered factors, where we find Bokodo theory, Rora or Lobola practice. Please move back. And HR issues is spiritualized. Tracy, can you please go to the first group of factors? Yeah, so that you can read what these women were saying as I'm speaking what I'm speaking, but you can tell women are feeding into this whole first group of social and cultural gendered. Tracy, can you please move back? Stay there on the first group of factors, please. Okay, so let's move to Mbokodo theory. I think those who are from South Africa, who are Zulu or closer, they understand this as grinding stone or rock, but it is often used to describe the strength and the resilience of women in the face of challenges. And usually there's a saying which says, "What tintim faz, what tintim Mbokodo." You strike a woman, you strike a rock. But this hinder health. This is the hindrance to health, because whilst we celebrate resilience, this cultural narrative can also hinder health equality by romanticizing women's endurance of suffering and pain. With the truth that Piri 2003 says, she unveils that African culture continues to encourage African men to continue to have sex with other partners apart from the ones they are officially married to. And it means that because of this theory, it teaches women to endure suffering, and they end up having more high risk of having and sustaining HIV and AIDS, especially when we talk about health issues like HIV and AIDS. Then the gendered impact places a strong expectation on women to bear heavy burdens, including domestic labor, childcare, and illness without complaining or seeking help. So at the end of the day, this leads to the late presentation at health facilities for conditions like HIV or other conditions because of in the name of being a Mbokodo or a rock. Then if you want to move also to another factor, another bulletin, which is Rora or Lobola, this is the common practice that most of us know, especially from Southern Africa, Zimbabwe or South Africa. It is a beautiful love story in my eyes, but sometimes it is meant to unite families. But however, this practice is affected by patriarchal views, which at the end compromises married women choices. From where I come from, in my culture, the state of women in culture is aligned with patriarchal choices. So marriage must remain intact and sustained. As a result, despite other unhealthy issues that may rise, could be gender-based violence, could be even other reproductive health issues, a woman end up saying, "I'll stay for my children," because she doesn't have to end marriage, and she might be abused, but she doesn't have a choice of liberation because of a community which strongly believe in the continuity of a marriage since they benefited from Lobola or Aurora. If you check on the of one of the comments on social media. One person says the root of some women's health problem is culture. If you married to a man who feels like your lobola was expensive, your chances to suffer in that marriage are very high. You are abused mentally, blah 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 blah. And hence, some scholars like Shoko from Zimbabwe, they argue that even if she decides to move out of that marriage, she's regarded as a prostitute. So at the end of the day, a woman stays in that marriage, whether it's healthy or unhealthy, because of the social, cultural, and gendered practices and expectations, like lobola. And then the fear of discrimination or stigma. Fear of being ashamed based on a health condition, it leads to secrecy and even avoiding to seek help. And at the end of the day, it hinders health, particularly surrounding issues like reproductive issues and infertility. A woman like me will ask herself, what will people say if I find out that I'm not able to bear children? Women in the African context are expected to solve this equation. So this is from Baloy, one of the scholars here in South Africa. He argues that in the context of marriage and in the context of fertility versus infertility, African women are expected to solve the equation of infertility and childbearing in their own unique and possible crafty way. No one is going to come and save you. It is you as a woman who have to find out, why am I not infertile? You're not even asking or even going to health facilities with your husband to find out who is infertile or not, but it is your problem. And this is a double jeopardy on women, because we often experience a harsher judgment than our spouses, because we have to be good mothers, we have to be good wives, we have to be real and ideal women. Tracy, can you please to the next slide, please? Okay. Tracy, can you please move to the next slide? Okay, so these were some of the responses from Instagram and Facebook. And I was asking about the biggest barrier to women's health. And this takes us to, if you check, most people were saying lack of money, but 25% from my Instagram said religious and cultural beliefs. In this next slide, Tracy. Okay, thank you. So, and this takes us to go back to look at economic factors, where these three stories or these three comments, for example, they are talking about lack of opportunity, low income, and poor economy. But according to myself, I was just thinking that, is it really the lack of jobs for women or poor economy? But let's talk about this, colleagues. You can even comment in the chat. Is it really the lack of jobs for women or poor economy? Because in this 21st century, we all know that today, if men and women apply for jobs, this is where I come from. Women likely have a chance to get a job. But I feel like I have a different perspective, because there are so many factors surrounding a girl child or women and what they're expected to be in an African context, which have nothing to do with high levels where we are now talking about lack of job or less income. Before we even go there, we are expected to be housewives, child bearers, housekeepers, etc. And this is the real femininity. This is the real ideal of being an African woman. So even if you go on social media nowadays, there's a whole lot of debate on why African women are studying like no one's business, why African women are doing their PhDs, because we are not expected to move higher to those levels of high education. It's like a non-normative life path. For me as Lindy or Princess Maseko to study a PhD, I have to, straight from, I think after 16 years, I have to maybe move to marriage or something like that. So because of that, women find it hard to pursue to higher education, and because of that fear, even because of lack of opportunities at an early age due to other cultural contexts, then women do not have the opportunity to go to school. They do not have the opportunity to go to higher degrees, and it is quite expensive. Obviously, if you don't go to school, you won't get a higher job, and when you want to go to the hospital, it is quite difficult for you to pay for yourself. Next slide, please. Can we talk about oh, thank you very much. And then we have religious factors out of these stories. We have traditional theology, where women's health is hindered by their perspective on womanhood being defined, being predestined to be fertile and give birth. I would like to use Dr. Zamadlamini's words. She's here. She's just presented. She argues that the Bible is seen by many as the definitive word of God, serves as a means to justify male superiority and hinders critical examination of text that reinforce gender inequality. Such theological frameworks, they deny African women's health decision-making power regarding their own health and well-being. So if sexual and reproductive health rights issues are spiritualized or seen as taboo, they also hinder equitable health for African women in accessing the essential healthcare services. And at the end of the day, they lead to increased vulnerability and gaps in health outcomes. And we go also to the issues like HIV and AIDS. If HIV and AIDS is still seen a taboo, actually this makes me very frustrated, because how many years we have been talking about HIV and AIDS? If HIV and AIDS, like some of the women have commented in the social media that it is still seen as a taboo, we have African women theologians like Isabel Apao-Piri, who say that the church at some point, it has to admit that unknowingly and knowingly it is contributing to the spread of HIV. Because, for example, talking of the theology of sin, it helps to promote stigmatization, exclusion, and suffering of individuals suffering from HIV and AIDS. And this is the reason why these issues are not easy to talk about. Can you move to the next slide, please? Right. So, a part of other comments in this slide, we see that if you read closely, there are some percentage we say with women who are saying their faith spaces are still safe. Some are saying it's still a taboo. Some are saying the faith space is not safe. So it's like a contested debate. It's like 50-50, you know. But engaging with gender and health issues with the church is very important. This is what we have to give at the back of our mind. We have this debate on the podium, and we have as theologians or as women of faith or as scholars, as civil societies, we need to understand that the reason why we are here today to engage gender and health issues, African women, with the church, it is very important. Why? Because our faith communities, our churches have been and are trusted spaces in society. The church possesses the potential to serve as a transformative platform for social reflection, advocacy, and action by monitoring societal dynamics and addressing pressing issues related to gender, equality, and human dignity. It is also important then now to have honest, critical, and difficult conversation within faith communities about how the church has historically or is responding to issues of gender equality and issues of health. So my question that I'll ask myself, or that I'll ask the person sitting next to me, or the church itself, is if the church spaces are trusted spaces, like what other women are saying in the comments, are they truly delivering on that trust and becoming reliable platforms for addressing health issues for women? That is the question. Next slide, please. Yeah, as I conclude, let's talk about this religion. Let's look at religion with a critical eye. Let's look at culture with a critical eye, and mostly importantly, patriarchy, because these are three recipes for disasters for African women's health. Next slide, please. And also, it is very interesting what this young woman is said here. She said, I cannot say the church is a safe place or not, but rather there is need to create such spaces to begin with. So it also takes us back to that contested debate that are our churches spaces safe spaces? Have they ever been safe spaces? And what is happening? And we have to ask ourselves these three questions. I did not want to give any solution to these matters. As I said, that even in the first place, I had to ask women from different contexts, because we need to interact, we need to engage on this, because one voice does not bring any solution. But even in the chat box or wherever you are, these three questions, 4 questions, I mean, can they be achieved? Can we achieve safe faith spaces? Can we transform culture, religious, and gender norms that limit women's access to health? Can we support women by involving the community, faith leaders, and providing education about health rights? Can we create policies and systems that give women better access to good and fair healthcare? And I would like us to have an honest answers to ourselves, because remember, these achievements or that we are pointing at, or the goals that we are looking at as scholars, as civil societies, they vary from context to context, because what causes health, African women's health and inequality is not one thing. They are connected dots. It's a constellation of ideas, and it depends with the context. So when we try to answer these questions, let's not try to romanticize them. Let's not try to be excited, but let's be real about it and see if it's not working, it's not working. Then we start from there and see how best can we move from this? How best can we create self-faith spaces so that women in their large numbers, as they go to church every Sunday or every Saturday or any other day of the week, they find the church as a space where they can share their health issues and find solution in their health lifestyles. Tracy and colleagues, I just want to say thank you for giving me the opportunity, but also this is the opportunity as well to interact, to share ideas. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lindiwe. I really enjoyed that. And just to say that in the beginning, you say you adopt a rich African lens and you think you are biased. I don't think you're biased. I think that is your context, that is your positionality. So it makes perfect sense that you speak from that perspective. So thank you. We will now move on to our next speaker, Dr. Siwa, who will speak on masculinity, heteropatriarchy, and health. Dr. Siwa, you may proceed.
Thank you so much. Let me just find this presentation. Okay, here it is. Could you just please confirm if you can see the presentation?
Yes, we can see it.
All right, great. So yes, good morning again, and thank you for the opportunity to engage in such a space. Just to also echo the previous two speakers, I think it would be a disservice for us not to recognize that as much as religion is such a beautiful thing that we all ascribe to, but we also must be honest with ourselves to note that in most cases, if not often, it has been used as a site of struggle and sometimes as a tool to oppress other people, whether it's men, women, or other men in the same context. However, but for the study, we'll just, for this presentation, I will just focus on masculinity, heteropatriarchy, and health. And within this presentation, just also try to keep in mind the two previous presentations that were done because it is all somehow interlinked. So my presentation really, this is just a rough outline. It will not be as according to these points, but also just to give you sort of the landscape in which I base this presentation on, and also just for the concept that I'm going to discuss, looking at South Africa as a patriarchal society and how as masculinity and femininities are gendered identities who are socialized into specific roles, and then we look into hegemonic masculinity. And then we'll also discuss then how do these discourses of hegemonic masculinity contribute to gender inequality within the South African context. And then lastly, we'll look into how religion and culture are sort of like social reproduction of what patriarchy is. So, so this is sort of like the context of this presentation, of what we are going to be speaking about. So first of all, we look at patriarchy. There's a thing that when I was still doing my postgrad, there's like down with patriarchy, and it was a thing. And at first I didn't understand why do we need to deconstruct patriarchy and what is it about patriarchy that is so oppressive, especially coming from a religious perspective, and also a man who grew up in a rural community where such things we grew up as normal, and you really have to think that much about it. So it is defined as a social system that promotes hierarchies and awards economic, political, and social power to one group over the other. In this case, which usually it would be men. And it does not only mean the subordination of females to males, but the whole structure of the whole structure that fathers rule society. It's aristocracy over masters over slaves, kings over subject, racial overlords over colonized people. So we look at patriarchy as a system that is in a form of that promotes the hierarchical power within society, whether it is from within a colonized world or whether there is some form of master or slave and subjects in this regard. So then it reinforces codes and values through the combination of sexism, misogyny, and paternalism. So then within this gender hierarchy, it is maintained through patriarchy that it also includes gender relations. It gives the male gender or male privilege and ensures that all structures of society do not deviate from the rule. So this system is also, it ensures that gender relations remain unequal. It grants men the structural and works to prevent anyone from deviating from these norms. So when we look at then in gender socialization and heteronormativity, so we look at gender socialization that occurs throughout our lives, from the beginning at birth and childhood, where gender roles are ascribed and performed, and they are socially constructed, policed, and regulated. So boys are socialized from a young age about the appropriate male behavior, and girls how to be a lady, how a lady carries themselves, and the roles are attached then to these gendered bodies. And then as we grow older, gender identities such as masculinity and femininity are entrenched in us through social systems that include patriarchy, religion, and culture. These systems ensure that we do not transgress and against these gendered identities. Dr. Zamini spoke about how the system itself, patriarchy, religion, and culture has become oppressive to non-heterosexual gender identities or expressions. So this also speaks to that. So then when we, in a large scheme of things, then masculinity roles are usually associated with strength, aggression, and dominance, while feminine roles are usually associated with passivity, nurturing, and subordination. And it also goes back to the two previous speakers, then how then this whole theology of subordination or this theology of submission from women comes from. And it also, when you speak about subordination as well, when you look at the hierarchy of masculinity theory, where you look at subordination as those masculinities that are being oppressed and sometimes marginalized to an extent because of the non-heteronormative gender identity and expression that they express. But more importantly, it is a systematic contract that these gender roles within a heteropatriarchal, they are constructed, within a heteropatriarchal framework where heterosexuality and heteronormativity is the rule, not the exception. There is some great work that has been done around this area, looking into masculinity specifically within the African context. into how gender socialization work and how then young men or boys are socialized into heteronormativity. There is a great book that was done, that was edited by Tamara Sheffer. I think she is with the University of Western Cape. It is titled From Boys to Men, Social Constructions of Masculinity. And then there's also in that particular publication as well, there are colleagues who speak about how boys are even discouraged to do domestic chores where there is a girl child in the household. There is also a current book that was done by Professor Monoselanga from Wits University, titled Becoming Men, Black Masculinities in a South African Township, who follows then a group of adolescent boys in their construction and negotiation of masculinity within the South African township. So this is a great read if you just want to understand how then this whole process of gender socialization works and how boys are entrenched into within the patriarchal system of this is how a man should act. All right. So gender is a socially constructed ideology, as I've explained, and it is fluid, plural, and often changing over time. So the pervasive nature of heteronormativity, which is a socially constructed ideology that believes that cisgender masculinity and femininity are normative gender identities, and it relies really on the assumption that non-heteronormative gender identities are deviant or inferior. Also, again, I refer back to the conversation earlier on that Dr. Lamini had touched on. So within the heteronormative norms, then masculinity again is characterized by toughness, dominance, non-feminine behavior, hypersexuality, aggression, being the head of the household, provider, risk-taking, and the heterosexual. So then it comes down then to this social phrase that boys will be boys, which then implies that such behavior is unchangeable and that sometimes it is part of boys' nature. So it is part of us that are excusing boys from aggressive behavior. And then we sort of accept that aggressive behavior when it does not inflict significant harm, and is often accepted from boys and men because it is congruent within the cultural script for masculinity. So then now we look into hegemonic masculinity and really get into these dominant discourses of masculinity, but I'm just going to focus on three because it's quite a lot, but just for the sake of time, we're just going to focus on three, and also based on the doctoral work that I've done looking into masculinities within a religious context. So it is defined as a concept referring to a cultural dynamics by which gender claims and sustains a leading position in social life. So then hegemonic masculinity is a configuration of gender practice which embodies a culturally accepted answer to the problem of legitimacy of patriarchy, which then becomes important when we think back on the first slide, that hegemonic masculinity legitimizes patriarchy, which then guarantees male dominance and the subordination of women. So within this ideology then of masculinity, it is constructed through the dominant patriarchal discourses, which include that a man is a provider, that a man is a protector, or he is the head or a leader of the family. And I want to focus on then with the first part of these discourses, which is provision. That a man is a provider. So this usually refers to the financial provision and a man's ability to provide, which then affirms his masculine status within the society and then has successfully performed his role. In a study in Northwest Mind, it was performed by Sigwe, who were looking at why men are working in mines generally, and then what the study found, it was that the provider role for men is inescapable, and that is why most of them migrated into mines, which are located in Gauteng and Northwest. And this migration still happens today in different contexts, where we find even men migrating from different provinces into Gauteng for better economic opportunities. So this is largely one of the reasons why they migrate, so that they are able to provide this provider role, because when you are a man, you are a provider. You cannot separate the two. And then when we look at it, it is, again, it is inescapable demand that is imposed by society and is then also internalized intrinsically as part of our manhood. And I think there's also some great work that was done with Usonke Gender Justice, who are looking at how then do men define themselves. And we have internalized this as men, that I have to provide. It is sort of an internalized, intrinsic part of who we are as men. So as sort of like we have to provide, and within the context that we live in, it's sort of one of those things that are sort of make you dateable, for a lack of a better word. And then it brings also into this concept of patriarchal bargaining, which is facilitated by an ideology that takes place in the division of labor between women and men, ultimately enabling men to maintain economic power over women. So this usually happens within the context of an intimate relationship between a man and a woman, or a marriage, where the husband is supposed to acquire and maintain the family estate and wealth, and then provide their wives with the money to purchase household goods and services. And then this is where now this modern concept of housewives come in, because I think there's also this discourse around social media that women want a very rich husband so that they don't have to work and become housewives. So in a way, it is a reinforcement of patriarchal bargaining into how then we sustain these gender roles within a heteropatriarchal framework. And it also speaks to these ideas of that a man must provide. I remember back then on Twitter, it was the whole hashtag like a man must. And then later on Instagram, there was a movement of sprinkle masculinities, where men also wanted to be taken care of which is nothing wrong about that. But in the context where we live in a patriarchal society that we live in, again, these things speak to how we have been socialized as gendered beings into specific gender roles and expectations. However, given the current state of our economy and high unemployment rate, it is becoming increasingly difficult for men to live up to this norm, and consequently, it leads to male sexual entitlement of a woman's bodies, and women not having agency to make financial decisions financial decisions for themselves. And then again, in a context that is where there's high unemployment and economic precarity, men struggle to meet these expectations. This then produces frustration, emasculation, and in some cases, harmful expression of entitlement, including control over women's bodies and financial decisions. So Professor Zetu, I think in 2021, she connects this whole idea of male entitlement to what colonial settlers did to South Africa when they took the land. She calls it the raping of the land, where it was taken by force without permission. And this is what is currently happening within our country, where men are taking women's bodies without permission, because we've such behavior, and these dominant discourses of masculinity continue to perpetuate such narratives that if a man takes out a woman, there is that expectation that they would in return get a sexual. Okay, I'm realizing I'm just gonna quickly run through this. So, and then we look now into the protector role, and in which then protection is an embodied experience and expectation that a man must fulfill. It is bestowed upon them. It is then entitled. So within a patriarchal framework, it has the connotation that protection, that a man is a protector and protect all that he has and his family. These men then cannot escape those men who then cannot protect are often seen as weak and emasculated by their peers. However, if we look into studies of intimate partner violence and sexual violence, it proves that men have failed to protect those that to fully or successfully embody this role, because they fail to protect those that are meant to protect. So then we need then to sort of critically engage in the notion of protection as a masculine trait that needs to be deconstructed, and have a conversation with men as both perpetrators of violence. So then this contradiction also invites us to critically interrogate this idea. These roles are not neutral. They are deeply embedded within a patriarchal ideology and shape how men understand themselves and how society evaluates themselves as well. These are the norms that we see men as society as. So then I'm going to just touch a little bit on religion and culture. So then we cannot escape or separate religion and culture, because as social institutions, they influence our moral behavior and often police how we perform and do gender. So then this discourse then of male headship and headship is predominantly enforced within the religious rhetoric and cultural notion of the role of man as the head of their household. Sorajini Nadar unpacks this complex implications of this discourse and argues that religious men use discursive power to instill this discourse within their faith communities and cannot be questioned because God has said so. And then this God rhetoric then is based on the creation story in the book of Genesis, where God created man and given the instruction to Adam, and then has implication of then imposing patriarchal ideals of masculinity. So then the idea of male headship or leadership within the religious cultural discourses sort of the discourse of father then perpetuates the patriarchal ideology of female submission. Again, it goes back to what Dr. Zam was speaking again earlier on, and what Ms. Masego spoke on earlier on. So, and then what I found mostly in my own work is that there is a selective interpretation of scripture, even within general society, that wives must submit to their husband, and this theology has sort of been misused by those in power, particularly men in the pulpit, to serve and achieve a patriarchal agenda. It has been used to entrench women's subordination while ignoring the reciprocal part or responsibility that is placed on men. So this usually scripture is read in one instant where it is used to infer and reinforce that women must be submissive to their husband. But there's also a greater part of that scripture that places certain responsibilities on men. So then it becomes an idea then of who reads the scripture and how it is interpreted, and then the consequences of that interpretation. So if you're interested in reading such things, then there's a great article by Professor Khabaise. She looks at Pentecostal hermeneutics and also a great work around feminist theologies that deal with this concept. So then to sustain the hierarchical order and this patriarchal system, Harris then argues that leadership is equal to power. So then when there is a perceived threat to power, then the whole system of patriarchy is destabilized. Again, I'd like to refer you to this UDC Melane Memorial Lecture that was dealing with toxic masculinities and construction of toxic masculinities. And one of the men that interviewed that was speaking into power said the following, that so now when women start having economic power, they start to challenge the kind of authority, and then to men this is encouraging some kind of inferiority, because it feels that your power is taken away, and to men that is a challenge. So again, it speaks to that when when now you're a man, when you take it back to the beginning, when you must be a provider and protector and then a leader, then if you cannot, one cannot be in a position of leadership if then they cannot provide for their family. Because now when the woman becomes, according to this, when the woman becomes the sole breadwinner of the family, and then the power dynamics then changes and the whole patriarchal system is destabilized, and then men start feeling emasculated. And I think one of the things that we should take away and understand is that patriarchal system is structured in a way that it privileges men, regardless of how we may glorify it or in how we may see it in a different light. So now I'll just move in just a little bit of health. So I purposefully did focus on mental health because I know that colleagues in the public healthcare sector have done a whole lot of work in terms of men's health and sexual and reproductive health, right, including HIV and AIDS. But I want to focus on the mental health based on the dominant discourses of masculinity that we discussed, and how the masculinities are constructed. So men often view mental health as an unnatural disease. Notice I didn't say disease, it is a disease because it's some form of it is some form of disease within the body, and is often perceived as weakness. So being vulnerable in this aspect is not desirable, because vulnerability again is a feminine trait that men have been taught to ignore. And then again, the notions of sizovasibancane or abantu besilisa bafela ngaphakathi breeds an emotional instability, because men have not been given that permission by society to be vulnerable. And then it also speak to how the patriarchy has silenced men, and it encourages them to be emotionally restrictive, as conceptual norms of masculinity that are rooted in social and cultural exploitation. So I think then we need to create a space for men to be vulnerable, and we must remember that emotion is a human feeling, not a gendered feeling. So in conclusion, then there is an important need to understand the entanglement of masculinity, heteropatriarchy, and health in the South African system, which then requires a critical interrogation of these religio-cultural systems that produce and sustain gender power through patriarchy. And then as masculinity as a socially constructed identity that is contextually policed, reproduced, and legitimized through the dominant discourses of masculinity, and then the religious and cultural enforcement of male headship, coupled with economic structures that privilege men as providers, entrenches a gender order in which inequality is both normalized and moralized. So therefore, addressing gender equality then demands more than a policy reform or behavioral change, but it requires a fundamental reimagining of masculinity itself. And so therefore, by exposing these patriarchal logics embedded in these systems, we open space for alternative masculinities, which are forms of masculinity that are grounded in rationality, care, accountability, and mutual respect. And then if we are able to do so, and then perhaps we might realize the envisioned goal of sustainable development goal number 5 within our context. And then with that, I thank you.
Woohoo!
Thank you, Dr. Siwa. Thank you very much. We shall move on to Dr. Avashoni Tsangwani. Please go ahead, Dr. Tsangwani. And just to say that I see people are raising their hands, but I also note that there are many comments in the chat. So we will discuss all the comments, or we'll try to discuss the comments and the questions once all the speakers have spoken. Thanks.
Good morning. I'm trying to share I just want to check if maybe everyone is able to see my presentation. Are you, Program Director, are you able to see the presentation?
Not yet.
Oh my God. I'm trying to share, but I don't know what is happening. Let me try to share again. Is it not visible? Are you able to see?
Not yet.
Oh my God. Let me use what I have. I'm failing to share. I don't know what is happening. Okay. But I'm from the Commission for the Promotion and the Protection of the Rights of Cultural, Religious, and Linguistic Communities. So I will be advocating for religious rights of communities today under the title which says Religion, Gender, and Health Accountability for Religious Influence. So my presentation will be answering or will be in response to the question which says, how does gender inequality take shape through religious influence within health settings? And what does this reveal about who is included, who is excluded, and who is being prioritized in systems of care and access protection? So what I did for us to move together, well, I have tried to divide this question or cut it into 5 sub-questions. The first question will be on how does gender inequality take shape through religious influence within health settings. And the second question that we will look at is what does this reveal about who is included? The third one is who is excluded. And the fourth one is who is being prioritized in systems of care. The last is the access to protection. So maybe for us to move together, let me remind you of the definition of religion. And I'm adding to what others have been saying because I realize that whatever they're saying is more or less of what I have prepared. So maybe to remind each other of what religion is, I have given a smaller description of religion. Religion is a system of beliefs, practices, values, and rituals that relate humanity to the sacred, to the divine, or ultimate reality. It often involves beliefs in a higher power or powers, such as God, gods, or spiritual forces. It involves beliefs in moral codes that guides one's behavior and organized form of worship within a community. In other words, it is human beings' relationship with an attitude towards that which they regard as holy, sacred, absolute, spiritual, or divine. So let me come to the questions that I have tried to respond to. The first one is how does gender inequality take shape through religious influence within health settings? Gender inequality in health settings often takes shape through religious doctrine, cultural interpretation of faith, and institutional practices that influence decision-making, access, and power relations. So religion can provide moral guidance, yes, we know, and community support. But in the meantime, it can also shape systems in ways that privilege some groups while marginalizing others. So I have identified 5 factors that will help us explain how this happens and what it reveals about inclusion and exclusion in health system. The first factor that I have identified is religion as a social determinant of health. Many religious doctrines place strong moral regulations on sexuality, on reproduction, and family roles. So when these beliefs influence health policies or clinical practices, they can affect policies regarding contraception, regarding abortion, which we know abortion in South Africa is legalized. The contraception, it has to be one's choice, whether you make use of it or not. HIV prevention, where maybe a woman would maybe not allowed or feel not comfortable to request maybe the husband to use condoms, and gender affirming services. So the other thing that this can influence is while religion can foster compassion, solidarity, and community-based care, it also creates barriers to accessing healthcare that reflect and reinforce gender inequalities. Women in most cases are framed primarily as mothers or caregivers, rather than autonomous health decision makers. Priorities are given to marital considerations over a woman's physical, mental, or social economic well-being. And this in practice may result in providers of services refusing services on religious grounds, causing delays in care, or imposing moral judgments during clinical encounters. Let me also give an example of how some religious institutions operate. Because of all this, the influence in religion, when it also affects the decision making maybe on women, you find that some religious institutions, they would go to an extent of maybe encouraging men to get some or to get married to other women, and they would also they do it in a manner that maybe the first woman would be forced to give consent to the other marriages because of because of the issue of maybe not giving women the right to have to make decision in relating to things like contraception, abortion. So what they do maybe for their family planning, they even go to an extent of getting married to some other woman, which the woman is forced. And at the end of the day, we find that so many women would be depressed, having so many challenges because of what they are forced to do. And then the other factor is gendered authority or decision making. Religious traditions often reinforce male leadership or authority, which can translate into health settings where male religious leaders influence health policy debates more than women or gender diverse people. Husbands, fathers, or elders are expected to consent to women's medical decisions. Women health workers may be present in large numbers, but excluded from senior leadership and policy influence. We have few, or maybe we do not have many women in maybe health institutions that are in senior leadership positions, like superintendent, CEOs. And then the other factor is gender norms and religious authority. Religious traditions often establish gender roles through sacred texts and institutional teachings. For example, within the Roman Catholic Church, doctrinal stances on contraception and abortion influence healthcare services in Catholic affiliated hospitals worldwide. Decisions regarding reproductive services and family planning may be shaped by patriarchal interpretation of doctrine, limiting women's participation in decision-making. Such institutional patriarchy reinforces gender hierarchies by positioning male religious authority as the arbiter of women's reproductive choices. This dynamic stands in contrast to the equality protection entrenched in Section 9 of our Constitution. The other factor is moral hierarchies of deserving patients and moral regulations. Religiously influenced care can create implicit categories of who is worthy of care. Obviously, there are married heterosexual reproductive women. Married heterosexual reproductive women may be treated as morally legitimate patients, and unmarried women, adolescents, LGBTQIA+ persons, sex workers, or survivors of sexual violence may face stigma, denial of services, or silence around their own needs. The last factor is moral judgment embedded in care delivery. Religious influence can shape how healthcare workers, whether consciously or unconsciously, judge patients' worthiness of care. Unmarried pregnant women may be stigmatized. Women living with HIV may be blamed or shamed. Married women may receive more sympathetic care. So gender inequality intensifies when women are expected to remain sexually faithful while lacking the power to negotiate condom use. Additionally, LGBTQ+ individuals may be excluded from services or face discrimination if religious doctrines condemn same-sex relationships. This creates a hierarchy of deservingness within health systems where heterosexual married individuals may be prioritized, while unmarried women, sex workers, and LGBTQ+ persons are marginalized. So the second question that I will respond to quickly is what reveals about inclusion in systems of care. Those who tend to be included and protected are individuals whose identities align with the dominant religious and cultural norms. There are male authority figures, married heterosexual families, those conforming to traditional gender roles, institutional religious doctrine, women who conform to dominant religious and gender norms, those with economic or geographic access to alternative care. So this inclusion is therefore conditional, not universal. So the other questions that I would like us to respond to is who is excluded, who is marginalized or silenced. Those most often excluded or inadequately include women seeking reproductive autonomy. So if you speak out, you find that you are excluded in the society. Adolescents requiring confidential sexual and reproductive health services, and also unmarried women. Survivors of gender-based violence when abuse is minimized to preserve a family or a religious reputation. LGBTQ+ individuals, people challenging patriarchal norms. Exclusion may be formal, resulting from the policy restrictions, or informal, based on shame, fear, or provider bias. So who is being prioritized? When religious influence shapes the health system, priority is often given to institutional beliefs over bodily autonomy. Male decision makers and patriarchal family structures are prioritized. Community reputation over personal safety. This reveals that health systems are not neutral. They reflect broader power relations where gender, religion, and authority intersect, often privileging male, heteronormative, and doctrinal interest over equity and rights-based care. So the fifth one, the last person, is system of care and access of protection or access protection. Religiously influenced health system often protect belief more robustly than they protect access. This reveals a hierarchy where moral order outweighs medical evidence. Institutional conscience outweighs patient consent. Gendered norms outweigh equity and justice. Ultimately, gender inequality in this context is not accidental, it is structural, reproduced through policy, practice, and also silence. So in conclusion, let me say that as women continue to challenge traditional boundaries within religious framework, there's a potential for significant social change that promotes gender equity. According to Mwale, Chita, and Mulunde, power and control are used to include and exclude individuals in diverse religious spaces. For example, poor women, migrant women, and gender diverse individuals are more likely to experience exclusion when religious values influence service provision. In contexts where religion significantly shapes national policy, such as in countries with strong church-state partnerships, public health frameworks may reflect dominant religious norms rather than pluralistic or secular principles. Inclusion typically favors those who conform to normative ideals, that is, married women seeking maternal care, men positioned as family heads, and individuals adhering to heterosexual norms. Whereas exclusion affects those whose identity challenge religious orthodoxy. However, health systems must evolve to embrace models of care that prioritize gender equality, that safeguard marginalized population, and ensure that access to vital health services is defined by individual need rather than adherence to moral standards. I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tsangwani. Thank you for that contribution. We will now move on to our last presenter, Commissioner van der Merwe. Van der Merwe, please proceed.
A very good morning, HOD. Thank you to all the speakers before me. Greetings from Panama. It's very early in the morning here. I am just going to share my screen. Colleagues, again, thank you. I hope you can all see my presentation. As introduced, I'm Commissioner van der Merwe. I'm a part-time commissioner at the CGE. I'm a national commissioner deployed to the Eastern Cape Province and will be speaking to you today on the intersection of gender, health, and religion. In terms of the outline of my presentation, we'll talk about the CGE mandate, our legal framework, what are the current responses in this discourse, looking at how the ways in which gender health and religion intersect, why this intersection matters. I'll also be talking about the role of the CGE. I'll point out three gaps in this area of work and what role the CGE can play going forward. In terms of our mandate, the Commission for Gender Equality is an independent statutory body. We are established alongside other Chapter 9 institutions under Section 181 of the Constitution of the Republic. Our mandate is provided for in Section 187 of the Constitution, as well as the Commission for Gender Equality Act of 1996. The CGE is mandated to promote respect for, protect, develop, and attain gender equality, and to make recommendations or any legislation affecting the status of women. Maybe just to put a little caveat there to say not only the status of women, because we've had to also work in ways that look at the rights of members of the queer community, gender diverse persons, and children. And then Section 11, subsection H and I of the CGE Act, the Constitution is mandated to monitor and evaluate implementation of global and regional conventions acceded to by South Africa for the promotion of gender equality. I just want to do a sound check. Am I audible? HOD?
Yes, you are audible, Com.
Thank you so much, HOD. So just in terms of the constitutional and legal framework, our work stems from Section 9, which relates to equality, Section 15, which is freedom of religion, and Section 27, which speaks to the right to health. PEPUDA is the Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act 4 of 2000, which gives effect to Section 9 of the Constitution, the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide, and the National Health Act. Some of the current responses that the CGE is driving at the moment in relation to this body of work would be the Gender-Based Violence and Femicide National Strategic Plan implementation, sexual and reproductive health policies, HIV prevention and treatment strategies, LGBTIA+ inclusion efforts, engagement with traditional and interfaith leaders. When we begin to look at some of the intersections of how these three areas intersect, which is religion, gender, and health. If we look, for example, at the issue of HIV statement, we find that the gender impact is that women often get blamed for transmission. The role of religion has always been, has predominantly been around the moral punishment narrative, and a health consequence would be delayed treatment and suboptimal adherence to treatment. In terms of the issue of sexual and reproductive health rights, we are seeing a reduced autonomy for women. We've heard earlier about the role of lobola as a cultural construct and how women access healthcare, and how that plays out within the religious sphere would be the production of pro-natalist doctrines. And as a consequence, we see unintended pregnancy as well as infertility stigma. In terms of gender-based violence, we've seen largely a violence as a normalization for women, and the the religious role in this regard would be, and it came out very prominently earlier, the concept of patriarchal theology. And what we've also seen in this regard as a consequence would be trauma as well as mental health decline. In terms of LGBTQ plus access, there's a well documented evidence base of discrimination and violence, particularly within the context of healthcare settings. And then I always say this in my own work is that the work that we do as healthcare practitioners is so value laden that instead of giving somebody a panado at the healthcare facility, we give them a Bible verse, that discourse around Adam and Eve and not Adam and Steve. Some of the direct consequences of this includes healthcare avoidance as well as high risk behaviors. So just to speak a little bit on the intersectionality of health, religion, and gender, my colleagues before me spoke about the diverse religious landscape that intersects with gender and health challenges. These often amplify barriers for women and gender diverse individuals through the promotion of stigma, patriarchal norms, and moralistic interpretations. Some of the key issues span HIV and AIDS, reproductive health, gender-based violence, as well as how healthcare access are shaped by some of these factors. Faith communities in South Africa perpetuate stigma by linking infection to moral or divine punishment, disproportionately affecting women who face gendered transmission of HIV. And then this moral lens is rooted in conservative Christianity, as well as traditional views, discourage treatment adherence, and open discussions on sexuality, exacerbating. Sorry, just encourages my apologies, discourages treatment adherence and open discussions on sexuality. And these continue to exacerbate health disparities. Women who comprise about 60% of people living with HIV, encounter compounded judgment due to patriarchal expectations, and then religious doctrines, especially in Christianity and African traditional religions, influence fertility and contraceptive attitudes, viewing children as divine blessings or ancestral duties while stigmatizing treatments like in vitro fertilization or abortion. You will see here some of the HIV denialism that happens within religious and cultural settings, where somebody who um, have is living with HIV, but and I'll make one medical example here to say that sometimes it's difficult to see the virus when somebody is virally suppressed. So, in many instances, churches and cultural and traditional institutions have seen that as a healing of HIV. Yet we know scientifically at the moment there is no cure for HIV. This continues to fuel this aspect of HIV denialism we've seen in the earlier days and largely continues at the moment. Folks who wait long in long queues um, to receive, to be preyed upon by pastors who supposedly cure HIV, and we know the science continue to tell us that at this point there has been no real cure to the HIV virus. So patriarchal interpretations, apologies. So some of the patriarchal interpretation often limit women's autonomy in reproductive choices. For example, the cultural taboos hindering access to services amid high unintended pregnancy rates. Infertility carries spiritual stigma, prompting reliance on healers before medical care. Religious institutions reinforce gender-based violence by normalizing patriarchal power through selective scriptural readings that justify violence against women as a cultural or moral imperative. And this has severe health consequences like physical trauma, mental health decline, delayed care seeking, with churches critiqued for complicity despite their community influence. Transformative faith-based interventions are emerging but face resistance from entrenched societal values and norms. And um, I and I think there's a really important point to be made in this regard, that behavior changing behavior, changing hearts and minds is often very long-term work. And sadly, that long-term work often comes at the cost of human life. And when we talk about human life within the context of gender health and religion, that often refers to women and gender diverse persons. Conservative religious factions equate non-heteronormative identities with sin, and this fuels hate and has been linked to corrective rape and healthcare refusals that deny access to essential services. This intersection drives mental health issues, HIV risk, and avoidance of public facilities, clashing with constitutional protections. Faith leaders' role remains ambivalent, blending exclusion with potential support. Why is this intersection so important, colleagues? Gender inequality remains persistent in South Africa and around the world. Religion continues to shape our social norms and power. Health systems are often a reflection of social attitudes, hence the promotion of a lack of access to gender diverse community as well as women's TOP. Lived reality often differ from the policy commitments as subjected and projected perceptions of healthcare service providers determine access to health, especially gender affirming care for the gender diverse community on their transition journey. And then economic status, especially within deep rural localities, is another factor that influences access to health, as per the preliminary findings on the gender and health study conducted by the CGE, which is currently underway. And then I also wish to make a really important point here about, geography and infrastructure are all um, very common determinants of how women access healthcare. For example, in my earlier days of sexual and reproductive health rights, we found that women had to divert or work longer distances in places where, for example, they have to cross a river in order to get to a point of care. And these have been illuminated more than enough on cutting edge program. What has been the role of the CGE in this regard? We continue to monitor, evaluate, as well as play an oversight role on gendered services for compliance with our constitution and adhering to the international standards regarding promotion of gender equality obligations, which our republic has ratified. We investigate complaints. We conduct public accountability hearings to duty bearers who are accountable on their role and adherence to gender transformational regulatory frameworks, as well as to conduct research and policy advocacy to promote more knowledge regarding gender mainstreaming and gender equality. We engage stakeholders across public and private sectors to adopt gender equality indicators and targets within their planning, budgeting, and the aligned M&E systems for promoting gender responsiveness within their work. And this is largely based on the principle that if you are not counted, you don't count. We also monitor discrimination in healthcare settings, advocate for relevant government departments and civil society organizations, key stakeholders to address harmful and cultural religious practices, conducting follow-up studies to monitor implementation of the CGE policy recommendations. We engage faith-based organizations and sensitize them about their role in promoting gender equality, as well as to advocate for survivor-centered approaches and the role of traditional leaders and religious leaders in advocating for interventions within their communities. Over the next 3 slides, I am going to point out some of the gaps that exist in relation to this work. So the first would be the disjuncture between the policy versus the lived reality, and that is speaking to legal equality versus substantive equality. Rural and marginalized community remain largely vulnerable due to some of the factors that I alluded to early regarding, women and gender diverse persons' economic status, their cultural status within their communities, as well as geography and structural issues. For example, infrastructure such as access to roads and especially in more rural areas that we've seen bridges where folks can access points of care. And then intersectionality has become a buzzword, but nonetheless, um, our current analysis points to the fact that we are not intersectional enough in terms of our thinking, in terms of our analysis. And I'm currently attending an international women's conversation in Panama, and we talked yesterday about the confusion and the conflation of intersectionality versus demography. And the point that I want us to walk away with is to say that, you know, intersectionality has been described in terms of some of the demographic parameters. For example, looking at when we conduct meetings, we will often think of intersectionality as inviting a Black woman, inviting a sex worker, inviting a disabled person. And that, for me, is not intersectional in any way, but rather points toward demographic parameters. But when one looks at intersectionalities, looking at how all of these factors operate in one person's life and how these the kind of intra-operation of all of these factors, and kind of like understanding the power relationship between all of these different factors. The second gap which I wish to point out is related to religious tensions. So resistance to comprehensive sexuality education, stigma surrounding abortion services, exclusion of LGBTI QIA persons in some faith contexts. And I'll also add here, looking at the tensions between, Christian-based churches versus, other forms of religion or culture. For example, that the recognition that an amen is as equal as a tamaku or a tokozani. So some of those tensions, is also a part of the gaps in terms of operationalizing, looking at the like these three intersections of like gender, health, and religion. And then lastly, gap three speaks to the health system capacity and some of the biases we carry, which is limited gender sensitivity training. And when we talk about limited gender sensitivity training, I wish to point out also here the training, not just in relation to women, because in the South African context, gender has become synonymous to women. Every person has a gender identity. Every person has a sexual orientation. Every person has a gender expression or an outlook in the ways in which we show up in the world. And healthcare system, the persons in those systems need to be trained accordingly to say that it's not, when we speak of gender, it's not only highlighting or illuminating the issues facing women within the healthcare context. We do generally see weak accountability mechanisms, underreporting of discrimination, and some of the underreporting of discrimination also has to do with how communities see discrimination or think of as discrimination. So often we don't recognize that the state imposed violence is still violence. And I'll make an example here for South Africa to have a 20-year waiting list for gender reassignment surgery is inherently violent. It's violent, and it needs to be framed accordingly. I've also heard in my own work where members of our constituency who tell us that, kind of narratives that says, he just raped you. At least he didn't kill you. Like that situation of it could have been worse. Like, and that really minimizes our thinking. It minimizes how we receive this information, and it really invalidates a person's experience of violence. And then another point to be made would be the exclusion of the gender diverse community regarding access to gender affirming care. I just alluded to that. And then misgendering that promotes exclusion. Just a very brief note to say misgendering refers to, you know, referring to me in the gender to which I don't identify. What role can the CGE play going forward? We will continue to strengthen monitoring and oversight. We facilitate interfaith dialogue. We advocate for traditional leaders' capacity building on gender-based violence and femicide and their role in the implementation of the existing regulatory frameworks. To advocate for intersectional health training, to expand research on lived experience and intersectionality of gender, religion, health, and disability, to promote community awareness on Chapter 2 of the Constitution of the Republic, which relates to the universal basic human rights, and to advocate for shelters for the gender diverse community, refugees, and asylum seekers who are also victims of gender-based violence. So just in conclusion, to wrap up, colleagues, we need to have strong constitutional commitments to this issue. We do see persistent implementation gaps, and that requires a multi-sectoral as well as an interdisciplinary approach to addressing these issues, as well as collaboration and accountability in relation to the office bearers regarding this body of work. I'll stop there. Thank you very much, HOD. I'm handing back to you.
Thank you, Commissioner van der Merwe. Thank you for that presentation. Just to note that we have reached the end of our presentation, and also our allocated time was 2 hours. However, I think that it's important for us to have a discussion and give people the opportunities to ask questions. So if people are okay with, having or let's say taking up an extra 10, 15 minutes or however long maybe people want to engage, we can do that. So I just suggest that maybe we take 15 minutes to discuss and pose some questions. And those who want to leave are welcome to leave. And if the conversation is a little bit longer, assuming that people are okay with having a little bit longer conversation, we maybe could do that until 12:30. Before I take any questions, I also just want to ask the presenters to please share the presentations with us. I think a lot of people are asking for the presentations. So without further delay, I'm just going to open it out for questions and also have a look at the chat to see if there are things that maybe I can raise. Thank you. Please raise your hand and then I will recognize you.
Program Director, there is a hand from Semi Matlala. Thank you.
Thank you. You may go ahead and ask your question.
Good day, everybody. I'm Simi Matlala. I'm from a movement called Council Advancing Gender Equality. We just been formed right now. Currently, I'm a student data analyst. I'm studying towards a master's degree with data science at RIT Institute of Rochester Institute of Technology. I'm sponsored by Palantir Technologies. Now, from my understanding, is that Commission for Gender Equality, since it's a Chapter 9 institution, it's supposed to cater for everybody, men, women, members of the LGBTQI. But I'm shocked to hear from Commissioner van der Merwe that it only caters for women and LGBTQI. That's greatly disturbing. And the issues that I want to raise is the one that I've also raised in 2024 with Commission for Gender Equality. Since then, they said that they will address them, but now you look at the issue of culture, religion, gender, and justice, they are all intertwined. In 2021, 2024, I raised the issue of Section 21 of Children's Act, that it discriminates against unmarried fathers because it demands that they pay in kaulo of which in some cases this amount can reach up to 30,000, of which is unconstitutional because the Constitution states that everybody has equal rights, has been treated equally, and also equally regardless of gender and race. But this section 2021, it's still there. Now, Commission for Gender Equality, I've raised them at the Gauteng Men's Gathering that was organized by Panyazali Sufi. Up to now, it's still there. It's never been addressed. You look at the issue of health system in South Africa. Hundreds of millions are allocated to address for the awareness and treatment of women's health. But when it comes to men's health, things like prostate cancer, anal cancer, testicular cancer, nothing is ever done. You ask yourself why. I've raised these issues, they were never taken care of. You look at the issue of gender-based violence. A research by Professor T.D. Tobejani of the University of Venda was conducted, and it found that 40% of men are victims of gender-based violence, but when they go to police stations to report these things, they are being dismissed, they're not being taken care of. Another research was done by the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and it found that 71% of men, when they go to police stations, they report that they've been victims of gender-based violence. They are not being taken care of. None of this, even the National Strategic Plan of GBV, which has allocated more than 2 billion, I think, it doesn't include male victims in any way. And this is my problem with the Commission for Gender Equality, that you only see men and boys as perpetrators, but when they are victims of GBV, violence that's perpetrated by women and girls, you are completely silent. Dr. Ngobo raised the issue of men internalizing the issue of being providers. Sure, that's something that men have to unlearn. But then again, women also pose the problem, because when men are unable to provide, what happens? They are denied access to their children. They go to family courts. Family courts always side with the mothers. It's very rare where you find a woman being punished by the courts for denying men access to his children. Up to so far, we've had only 5 women that have been convicted for parental alienation, which is a crime under Section 35 of the Children's Act. Now, this is the issue. These are the issues that Commission for Gender Equality has a constitutional obligations to address. But up to so far, we've never seen any action. It's always been silent. That's my presentation.
Thank you for that, and I hope our presenters are taking notes. Can I take another question? Can you help me, Minka, if you see something, because my view seems to not be showing everyone. If you see a hand.
There are no other hands. Maybe we can just refer to the chat box.
Okay.
There was a question from Tuli that was directed to Dr. Zama. Do you think that regulating churches will allow for the addressing of practices that leave women, girls, and widows vulnerable? Secondly, churches in South Africa own large quantities of land, which they secured during apartheid and some even during colonial era. Are there any steps to engage churches about releasing land for development and support for vulnerable congregants?
Okay, maybe
And
let's take one more.
Then, okay, let me just see. These are comments. Okay, Chairperson, I think maybe we may proceed because the chunk of these are comments, and then maybe we can come back to comments that we can have the responses first.
Okay. I suggest we just continue looking, you and I, while the questions that have been posed are answered by our panel. So I will hand over to the panel, and maybe I can just ask Commissioner van der Merwe to respond to the first question, and then the second question was Dr. Dlamini? Okay, in that order, please.
Thank you very much, HOD. Thank you, Sammy, for raising that question here. It's always, you might have also heard me say, it's always somewhat, let me look for the most diplomatic choice of words. It's always quite shocking, the kind of perception that exists regarding CGE. And you may have heard me say that as CGE, we are the Commission for Gender Equality. Everyone has a gender, including men and boys. And of course, that's part of this robust discussion. You may also have heard me say that all too often gender in the South African context is synonymized with women. The CGE is not and never has been a women's commission. In fact, Sammy, I really want to encourage you to deepen your analysis. I've put in the chat box access to a link in which the CGE has done groundbreaking work on the father's rights to paternal leave. I've put the link there. We continue to champion very important work that's not based only on the rights of women, but including how men and boys, and this is a national discourse, by the way, colleagues, about how do we need to have a moment, a reflection on how do we strengthen the inclusion of men and boys within the discourse on gender-based violence. But I also do feel really sad that I feel disappointed at the fact that the statement that the CGE is doing nothing for men. The CGE has been driving really important work. One of our commissioners have also looked at and continues to work actively in the space of understanding and shaping and reshaping what the inclusion of men and boys look like within the discourse on gender-based violence. I've added a link to the work in question, the court judgment on paternal, father's rights in relation to paternal leave. That's in the chat box. Thank you very much, Program Director.
Thank you very much, van der Merwe. Dr. Dlamini, do you want to respond? I see that you did respond in the chat. So maybe let us, the question on regulating churches. Do you want to add anything, or can we move on to other questions?
I think we can move on to other questions because the response has been shared on the chat box.
Okay. I see there's a question here that says, I don't see it anymore, but are we not supposed to address the negative interpretation of tradition that needs, or is it not the negative interpretation of tradition that needs to be addressed? I think it was in the context of, yeah, yes. So in other words, should we not be also looking at how those traditions maybe are interpreted negatively in discourses. I don't know who. Maybe we can ask. Is it Lindiwe to come in and respond to that? And I do see another hand. Maybe let me take that hand quickly, and then we will have two responses. Zahida Z, you may come in with a question.
Good day, everyone. And also thank you for such a thought-provoking presentation from all our speakers. So my question will be, as a queer representing person who is coming from deep rural areas in Venda, I would like to find out how do we take these conversations to rural areas where social injustices, stigma and discrimination based on gender, your gender identity or your sexual orientation remain a huge challenge. And looking at the fact that culture and religion are the also main factors of such injustices, in a sense that they no longer kind of like, more especially looking at religion or churches, they no longer kind of like create a safe space for everyone wherein we can be able to worship, as we are being discriminated based on our sexual orientation. And the issue of inequality and access to health services and also other services, it also still remains a huge challenge that needs to be addressed. Hence, due to lack of information and also access to information, it becomes difficult for the society in rural areas to kind of like have an understanding of the impact that is caused by these social injustices when it comes to maybe queer communities, and also looking at women and young girls. So is there maybe a process where we can be able to kind of like create a space where we can invite commissions like this and other Chapter 9 institutions to come and have these conversations in rural areas, so that our communities can be able to understand the different characteristics or the different sex characteristics that we have, and maybe how listen to maybe invite also different churches wherein we can be able to get their view on how are they kind of like using their religion to combat like the inequalities and social injustices that we face on our everyday lives, more especially in rural areas, because those are areas that are still under traditional leaders, of which they also lack information in regarding all these commissions and Chapter 9 institutions. So that's what I will like to find out, if it's possible that we can have conversations like this in rural areas, and what are the processes, or how do we go around it? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will ask Dr. Tsangwani maybe to respond to that second part. So please, Lindiwe Maseko, respond to the one on Lobola and tradition, and then Dr. Tsangwani can respond to the second question. Thank you, colleagues.
Okay, thank you. Let me say that I think if we work hand in hand with people like yourself and other people out there, I think we can achieve. Like what we are doing as a commission, we are all out in the unit, which is public education and advocacy. We move around in deep rural areas, Venda, where she's also referring to, and all other areas around the province. We move around trying to educate people about their rights. So maybe in some instances, I wanted to add to what I forgot whether it's a commissioner when she was responding to the question, Semi-Matlala's question about men, maybe not like their challenges not to be considered. I once worked with somebody, a male figure who was like having challenge, or he was a victim. This man, I had to go out and try to make him speak. So I wanted to say to Semi, men sometimes they are quiet. They do not want to speak out because it's like sometimes they feel like when they speak out, maybe they will be like look inferior or whatever. I don't know. But myself, I had to go out and walk with him, try to take him to wherever I took him so that he can get help. So when we have people who can maybe even encourage other people to speak out, I think we can, at the end of the day, achieve what we are seated here for. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tsangwani. I just want to add that, often I think you would know, and the colleagues here would know, that we do research in rural areas like Venda, like Kitsanin, like Pushback Ridge, and we actually don't go back to present the findings of our studies and to engage the communities on what we have found and, on a lot of these issues. So I do welcome also that comment to say that we need to have these, engagements, dialogue, go back to the communities and present where we have actually maybe interviewed some of these people. Okay, I will hand over to you, Lindiwe.
Okay, thank you so much, colleagues, for interacting. I think just like what I've said in my presentation on this issue of Lobola Aurora, whatever you call it in your context, the practice really, according to myself, does not, or to a certain extent, is not problematic. But our lived realities as men, women, or children, and human beings, they are affected or influenced by the systemic or the systems that are around us. For example, on this issue, throughout my studies and my scholarship and my frameworks that I've used, it's all about who administer or who take controls of a practice. For example, this issue of Aurora, we have to look at it from a patriarchal system perspective. And remember, when you're talking of patriarchy, we are not trying to strike against any gender or against men, but we are trying to demonstrate the system's impact, how the system impacts the lives of individuals and how it is facilitated, whether upheld by men or women or both. Patriarchy is a system, is not men, but it is a system that pertains and that upholds the idea that men are superior to women. So we need to find out, if you want to deal with these issues, we need to find out who relates to the system and structures that grants and sustain and justify men's authority or the authority on decision making concerning women and children. So you would find that the issue of the practice of lobola on its own, yes, someone wrote it is detrimental to women's rights. Payment of lobola seems to guarantee men control over their wives. It is because of the interpretation. How are you interpreting it? Are you interpreting it from an economic perspective, which is the econo patriarchal perspective, that men or a certain hierarchy has to benefit from the lobola or aurora? Or are you looking at it from a commodified perspective? Are you looking at it from a traditional perspective? Are you looking at it as a way of unifying families? So when I did my studies, I think, Tracy, you remember this when we were doing our honors. I wrote about flora from a Zimbabwean perspective, and I found out that historically it is a beautiful story, and it was not even an issue of these big amounts of money that were being given in exchange, but it was only a way of making two families come together and officially send off of the bride to the other family. But now, because of the economic meltdown and how people like how our societies and the interpretation of flora is changing and shifting from its original or organic sense to this issue of commodifying it. And even if you check, if you want to go on Google or if you want to research on what is Rora, what is Lobola, you'll find so many terms, economic terms. It's a transaction, it's about exchange. There are so many economic terms that are used to define this practice, but because of how it has been interpreted. But I think if you try to read it from a vernacular point of view or indigenous perspective, we could find that back then it was just a matter of making the families united. But now when patriarch comes in, that perspective that says men have authority over women, then everything, it dilutes everything. But I don't deny to some extent that such practices, no matter how much you want to deny it or run away from it, definitely at the end of the day, we as women, we find ourselves vulnerable somehow. But it is a very contested debate. It's not a discussion with one answer. It is, we can look at it from different perspectives. But all I can say is any other lived reality that you want to look at, any other practice that you want to look at, we zoom it with some lenses. We zoom it with the patriarchal lens, with the religious lens, with the cultural lens, and with the contextual lens. And this is how we find out how to what extent are women affected, to what extent are men benefiting, to what extent are children suffering from the union of the union or marriage union. So I don't know if I've answered, but this is my 2 cents on this. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that response. I just want to check if there are any more questions before we close. Maybe we can take one or two. Okay, two maybe. I see Christopher Ngomezulu. Your hand is up.
Yes, thank you so much. What empowering presentations that we've had. My maybe question or maybe concern, if I would say, but I don't think it's a concern. It's just a contribution to say, I think the challenge that we're having currently is like dealing with issues that have been in existence for a while. And maybe we are under pressure because of things that possibly were there, but we did not look at them with the perspective that we're looking at them right now. So I think it might take us a long way, but one of the things that should be done is too much emphasis in terms of engagement and the kind of engagements that we are having with communities. Because what we have seen lately is that most of the conversations we're having is just we have one day maybe dialogue, and then there are no follow-ups. There's especially in the in the urban areas and rural areas, this is what usually happens. You find that there is this conversation, but it happens just for that. And most of the time when you try to follow up, they will tell you with budget, maybe people are under funded, and therefore, because of funding restraint, you find that this conversation does not go deeper. It's just shallow. You know, you come in, you find people who are also, and I feel that is very oppressive in terms of the people that possibly, if you talk about men, for instance, who are at the line whereby system is still demanding from them, but yet they are also requested that they loosen in terms of maybe their perspective, which was informed by the old system, which when it comes to men, issue of lobola, for instance, issue of which was also mentioned by the other speaker, Semi Matala, he mentioned the issue of paying damage for children. All that is still lay on men because of the system, and sometimes you're unable to access your children because of that. And while those systematic demands are still on men, it means that the perspective of men it cannot be easily changed. And therefore, I think this conversation should be deep. It should have engagement, it should have dialogue, it should have debates. And I'm not talking about one-day debates, but I'm talking about strong debates whereby it can take days, it can take months, it can take years, and it should have a lot of funding for it to be able to be productive. Because if people really are under pressure because of funding this trade, it becomes a challenge because these conversations do not cut deep to the roots of the problem, but instead they make people to be reactive because they feel that they are being taken advantage of. Like men, most of the time, they are always on the defensive. They are always on the defensive when it comes to this conversation because the conversations are too shallow. They don't go deep. You see. So I think the challenges that we are having is that the commissions that are pushing and organizations on the ground that are pushing these, they are underfunded, and therefore the conversations are unable to quote it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. One last question. I don't see any hands. Colleagues, can you help? Is the one?
There are questions in the comments.
Okay.
So Thuli had questioned a question for Commissioner van der Merwe. A few years ago, CGE conducted research on shelters, and its findings showed insufficient spaces that cater for LGBTQI persons. What are the next steps envisioned to address this shortage? And the second question from James, how does the issue of cultural delusion, as argued by various African scholars, contribute to the current interpretation of concepts such as patriarchy in our day-to-day lives on African societies? Thank you.
Thank you, Mika. Colleagues, you may maybe answer some of the questions. There was a question earlier, and then these two questions on culture, and then van der Merwe, you can maybe just address the question on shelters. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. I appreciate it. I also want to say that while I appreciate the question, I also think there's room for all of the stakeholders to work on this. It would also be interesting to know that what has the civil society organizations done in relation to ensuring that beyond the report, there is also accountability. In my mind, the most sense would be to create an accountability dialogue. I would also like to urge the participant to get in touch with our provincial office, wherever they may be, in terms of asking questions around the research has been done, the narratives are collected, we have an analysis, where do we go from here? And this is where I really kind of like encourage that cross-sectoral and interdisciplinary collaborations to ensure that research don't just end up on a shelf somewhere collecting dust, but like how do we move collectively forward? So while I am grateful for the question and for the interaction, I want to throw the ball back out to say, what is it that can be done collectively? Because I don't imagine a space where the CGE is the only Chapter 9 organization working on this particular issue. but like how and where, what is the space for us to engage collaboratively to make sure that we translate actions that we can implement on the ground. Thank you very much.
Colleagues, do you want to come in for the other two questions?
I just want to touch a little bit on, I think it was raised by also Sammy and I think or Christopher, the issue around the whole provision and how in reference to how cultural systems such as paying off intlawulo and vice versa, then it affects access to children and of that sort of rhetoric around that. I think we also must be cognizant, right, that culture is a very beautiful thing, and it is what unites and defines us as a people. It only becomes problematic when now it is used as a tool to discriminate, to marginalize certain type of people or a certain group of people, and withholds certain benefits from those who do not ascribe to those cultures or who do not live up to those expectations of culture. And it is one of the things that creates the need for a bigger conversation as to within also traditional leadership and traditional structures and local traditional councils as to how then do we use culture in a positive manner that also serves the people that it aims to serve, and how do we curb the abuse of power by certain individuals to prevent access to certain things. But in the larger scheme of things, patriarchy as a system serves to ensure that systems in society functions, particularly when it comes to gender roles. And it has, and it continues to place men as the custodian of patriarchy. And there's a whole lot of literature amongst feminist theories and feminist theologies that interrogate patriarchy, how it has been used, and et cetera, et cetera. But when it comes to men, it's also how we've socialized ourselves as men and how we've embedded or that intrinsic view of who we are as men that we must provide. And when that is not met, and then it is created by and then there is that whole feelings of inferiority and emasculation. What we need to do is to engage patriarchy as a system itself. And then it becomes also problematic for men as well to engage such a system because they benefit from it as well. And I think in some way, one scholar was arguing that if we remove patriarchy from men, how then do we define a man? Where does man find his standing or his meaning if we remove patriarchy? So it's sort of those conversations that we need to have as a society. Then if we say that we are to engage critically with patriarchy, then men as well need to give up their patriarchal privilege that they have benefited from since inception or from the beginning of mankind. And unless we're able to have those critical conversations, we will always come back to these issues of how these patriarchal dominant discourses of masculinities and expectation not only oppress women, but also are oppressive towards men. And we'll keep having these conversations as to how this system as well then is oppressive towards men and it's blocking them from, for example, accessing their children. It is a systematic issue. It is not an individual issue. It is a systematic issue that finds itself in the social fabric of society and culture in what it is. So we could be having these conversations, but unless we are able to critically engage with patriarchy as a system and how it has affected people in its entirety, not a certain gender, and then we'll be able to see how then we could engage critically with these gender norms and expectations. Because in reality is men cannot live up to these expectations of patriarchy. How then do we create space for men as an alternative avenue in which they could express their masculinity without losing their social status or social standing? I think that I'll just end it there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Siwa. I think the question that I want to leave you all with is the question of whether culture or religion can change and evolve over time and what it will take to achieve that. But we have run over time, and I just want to thank everyone for being patient and also just the interest in the discussion. It shows that we need to have another engagement, maybe something deeper, longer, where people will really have the opportunity to engage on various aspects of this topic. So I just want to thank you for your patience, and then I just want to hand over to my colleague Philisiwe Gabela, who will come in to just do some closing remarks for us. She is the HOD of Public Education and at the Commission for Gender Equality. Phili, please, I hand over to you.
Oh, all right. Thank you, Program Director Dr. Obeni, the esteemed commissioners, Commissioner van der Merwe, Dr. Dlamini, Dr. Zanwani. I hope I am pronouncing your surname correctly, and pardon me if I am not. Dr. Ngobo, Dr. Ms. Maseko, the distinguished academics and public health scholars, leaders from our religious communities and society partners, and stakeholders, colleagues, and all stakeholders in attendance. Good afternoon. Mine is just to do, a very brief thing to actually put out our closing remarks as the Commission as it pertains to this critical engagement that we are having today. So on behalf of the Commission for Gender Equality, I really extend a sincere appreciation to every speaker and participant who has contributed to this deeply necessary social reflection engagement. Today's theme, which is titled From Systematic Inequalities to Embodied Realities, it challenges us to really confront uncomfortable truths because inequality is not theoretical, it is not statistical, it is lived in the bodies of each and every one of us. It is lived in the body of a woman denied reproductive health care. It is in the body of a gender and sexual diverse person who's turned away from services. It is in the body of a young person shamed into silence. It is in the body of communities whose social protections are steadily eroded. I think we can all agree that generally systematic inequalities become embodied realities. And what today's dialogue has sought to do, it has reaffirmed that gender inequality does not operate in isolation. It intersects with poverty, with race, with disability, with geography, with geographical location. As Commissioner van der Merwe alluded to, it really intersects with religion, migration, sex status, and sexuality. And when social protection systems weaken, I think we can all agree that whether these are true austerity policy, neglect, or institutional bias, it is already vulnerable, persons who carry the heaviest burden. Gender and sexual diverse persons. I hope I'm responding to you now, Semi, in your question. But then I think gender and sexual diverse persons in particular, they often exist at the sharpest edge of exclusion, navigating stigma in healthcare spaces, violence in communities, and moral judgment in religious settings. And this is not accidental. This situation is very structural. health must be understood not merely as a service delivery mechanism, this is our belief, but it must really be understood as a justice delivery. When healthcare spaces are not safe, not affirming, not inclusive, they really produce and reproduce harm. And when policy frameworks ignore lived realities, they institutionalize exclusions. I think the speakers, spoke at length about the elements of this in today's presentations. So I think it is really our view when we say that public health must therefore be grounded in dignity, it must be grounded in inequality, it must be grounded in the constitutional promise that no one's body is disposable. And Dr. Ngobo has touched on heteronormative constructs and how they continue to perpetuate harm to gender non-conforming and sexually diverse persons. We've also reflected today on the role of religion, a space that ought to shape moral imagination and social norms. And according to Dr. Dlamini's presentation this morning, and this is according to Dr. Dlamini's presentation this morning, that religion holds immense influence that ought to respect diversity, inclusion, and dignity. Yet we continue to witness negative masculinity, negative dominance, and weaponization in the teachings and in some religious practices. So our role is really not to create division between faith and rights. I think there was a question that came to say, CGE, what are you doing? And I think I really appreciated the response that came to say, remember, as a collective, we are able to do something. CGE, yes, has a role. However, there is a collective responsibility and oversight that really needs to be played by all so that we can foster courageous conversations that center bodily integrity, justice, and shared humanity. So I think the question before us is not really whether religion has influence, because we all know that it does. The question should be how that influence is exercised, who is supposed to prioritize, who is included, who has access, how is care framed and structured. I'm now quoting you, Dr. Zanwani, because you touched on cultural and religious model determinants and the CRL's position on these matters. So as we close, colleagues, please allow me to issue a collective challenge again, responding to that question that was saying, CGE, what are you doing? And I think the call that I'm just putting out, it is really collective because we really believe that as a collective, we may really be able to really make structural shifts and influence policy and behavior. So to the academics that are in this conversation today, please continue producing knowledge that challenges dominant exclusions and lived realities. And to the colleagues here who are public health practitioners, we are really calling out, or rather encouraging you to continue with designing frameworks and systems that see the whole person in the main, sharpening your mechanisms in providing inclusion, access to sexual and reproductive health and rights care. To religious leaders and CRL, we really encourage you to create frameworks and spaces where dignity, safety, discrimination, gender wars, heteronormativity, exclusion, autonomy, and misinformation where they are non-negotiables. And to the civil society colleagues who are in this conversation today, we really would like to challenge you to remain agile in challenging patriarchal norms and continue to be the source of safety, the source of refuge, and the source of information, because we continue to see that there is misinformation, there are misunderstandings, and the likes, and it is when we really see this agile civil society that is actually strong in actually correcting misinformations and continuing to educate, where we will be able to turn the tide. And to the policymakers and oversight institutions that we have here today, including CRL and ourselves as the Commission, we must respond to the structural and conservative African traditional and Christian views and gaps as highlighted by Commissioner van der Merwe. We must strengthen accountability as it pertains to SRHR promotion, the HIV prevention policies, various intersectional frameworks on gender and religion, and we must continue to advocate for gender-responsive budgeting and ensure that social protection systems are not conservative, that they do not collapse under the weight of traditional Christian faith, spiritual indifferences. As the Commission, we really remain steadfast in our constitutional mandate, which is to really promote respect for gender equality, monitoring protection for those most vulnerable to discrimination, monitoring, evaluating, and challenging systematic failures as it pertains to gender responsive interventions. And as a collective, and as everyone who is in this room today charged with a mandate of protecting gender equality, we cannot allow weakening social protections to reverse hard-won gains. If inequalities are embodied, then so too must justice be embodied in policy, in practice, and in care, and in geographical allocations. So colleagues, let today not be the end of a conversation, but the beginning of a sustained intersectional action. I think also going back to you again, my colleague Semi, when you were saying CGE, indulge me in terms of how you take these conversations to, to the broader society. And I think I really was encouraged by the response from Commissioner van der Merwe, redirecting us to all these repositories that CGE has so that we may be able to find the footprint of what CGE has actually stood out, for as it pertains to protecting gender equality. And also, I really want to challenge everyone who is in this room that please continue with advocacy. Please continue with advocating for strengthened laws. And please work with us when it comes to actually going out to look at the issues that are really aching the community. And I also saw Dr. Oveni actually talking about, us working closely with our provincial offices so that we may be able to follow the program of action that is centered to take the work of the Commission down to the grassroots levels. So colleagues, thank you for putting your limited resources aside to engage us about pathways to strengthening gender equality this morning, and I thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. The meeting is closed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.